Welcome in, everyone, to a special Halloween edition of After Further Review, Tiger Vision's weekly college football rundown show. I'm your host, Steve Spurrier. On my right, back from the dead, we've got Steve Irwin, the Crocodile Hunter. We've got Jim Harbaugh, Mr. Khakis right here. And on the far left, we've got the one and only Forrest Gump. Gentlemen, the college football rankings have just been released. We're going to dive right into those after we look at some games from this past week. So Bradley, after further review.
Raised from the dead, Mr. Steve Irwin and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, we will jump into. That both relates to you. Yep. We will jump right into the Week 9 in review, and it was a great Week 9. We'll start out with Iowa State and TCU. Y'all got any initial thoughts on this? I think all of us picked TCU coming into this week. I mean, Iowa State, kind of a feel-good story after the Oklahoma game, but what y'all think about this game?
Bit of a surprise. I mean, like you said, a lot of people were going with the Horned Frogs. I think they were ranked 4th at the time of this game. Iowa State's had one big win so far this season. I believe it was against Oklahoma. So they've shown that they can contend with bigger names. But this was really impressive. It was a low-scoring affair. I don't recall there being any issues with weather.
It was a sunny game.
It was a sunny game. It was just a slobber knocker. And for Iowa State to come out on top of a 14-7 score was impressive to me. I was impressed with the Cyclones.
And you could argue that TCU was maybe the better team on that day because they turned the ball over twice in the red zone. So they had the chances to score right there. But Iowa State credited them for just keeping it the way it was and eventually coming out with a win. I mean, Matt Campbell, probably one of the hottest coaches in the country right now on the block.
And I think even more importantly is Iowa State now has left the Big 12 with no undefeated team.
That's huge in my opinion.
That's huge to keep them alive.
Because even though they're adding a conference championship game this season, that conference is still lacking in prestige. So if they have an undefeated, it's going to be hard to leave them out. But with a one-loss champ, it becomes much easier to leave out the Big 12 yet again.
And the amazing part is Iowa State, with a win against Oklahoma State in the next couple weeks, basically guarantees them a chance to win the Big 12, which is incredible for them. Talk about raised from the dead. I mean, Iowa State was a program just left out to dry. I mean, no one really cared about him. So Kyle Kemp, credit to him. He's filling at quarterback, the walk-on, 4-0 since taking over the starting job. And they got, an inside track, like we said, to get to that Big 12 championship game.
This just kind of proves how inconsistent Big 12 can really be when it comes to showing up week by week. I mean, almost all these teams, like we said, all have one loss under their belts now. And it's just all these teams, it just seems like they're all just taking each other out one by one. Some of the reason I think Iowa State won this week, I think TCU was overrated.
Probably.
I think they were a little high ranked for how good they actually were. They hadn't really played too many teams, but these next few weeks are really going to prove how overrated TCU was.
Because I knew they had a good defense. And I mean, that showed. They held Iowa State to only 14 points. That's not much. Yeah. But they only scored 7 on their own. And that was my concern. They have a good defense, but what about that offense? And this was an offense that turned the ball over, like you said, twice in the red zone and 3 times total.
And credit to Iowa State's defense. I mean, I saw a stat. They sent 3 or fewer pass rushers on 19 of Kenny Hill's 25 pass attempts. So there was a lot of guys that Kenny Hill was trying to throw through. Great defensive scheme. We saw the old Kenny Hill kind of come back, which is exactly what TCU did not want. First time all year we've kind of seen regress, and they end up taking a loss and bumping back down in the rankings.
Yeah. Next game, we're going to touch on Notre Dame against NC State. This one was close at first, and then the Wolfpack got steamrolled. Fighting Irish came out on top over the Wolfpack 35-14. In my mind, the critical point in this game was, I believe there was almost a dead play where NC State had the ball. They thought, I think, offsides was going to be called, and so the quarterback just kind of carelessly threw the ball up, ended up turning into a pick six, which, if I believe correctly, put Notre Dame up by 2 scores, which totally changed the momentum and the tide of this game.
And that was the first NC State interception in the entire year. So, I mean, if you're looking at a game plan, that's what Notre Dame was trying to do, and, credit to them for actually getting it done. I mean, Josh Adams, I think right now we could say he's probably in the Heisman contention after his couple performances last week. Notre Dame, they remind me a lot of Georgia. They don't throw the ball a lot, but they run the ball, and they do it really, really well.
Yeah.
Wimbush only had 19 passing attempts that game, and Josh Adams had 27 carries. I mean, and they've been riding on the back of Josh Adams this whole season. He's doing fantastic so far. I'm hoping Clemson can take a note or two from that playbook. Hopefully Kelly Bryant isn't going to be throwing it too much, and we'll just be giving it to Feaster and Etienne or whoever else.
Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame is really beginning to look like a contender again. Yeah. These past few seasons have been kind of rough. And we've really, I know at least that myself, I've really been ragging on Notre Dame the past couple of seasons. But
I haven't taken them seriously since 2012. I think when they played in the championship game against Bama.
I haven't taken them seriously since this game.
Yeah,
Because
I feel like they've had a great chance to make the playoff the last few weeks. You know, I've voiced that on the show.
I thought the USC game might have been a one-hit wonder. I'm glad to see they're consistent with it now.
Yeah, coming into this game, I still had concerns about them because I knew USC was overrated. So them beating USC, yeah, it's a good win, but it didn't really tell me much.
And USC was banged up. Their defense was not healthy.
This win, for me, tells me more about Notre Dame than the USC win, and that's weird considering, you'd think beating USC would be a little bit better than beating NC State, but at this point, actually not really. And Notre Dame, to me, actually seems like a legitimate contender now.
I think they're one of the hottest teams in college football right now, just based off of the last 2 games that we've seen. They're playing some of their best football. The defense is getting turnovers, and they're converting those turnovers into touchdowns, and then they're just running the ball down the throats of all these defenses.
Well, we haven't talked about too much offense yet. Let's get into a game that had a lot of offense. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, one of my favorite coaches. They went up against West Virginia this past weekend, beat them 50-39. High-scoring affair. Oklahoma State still only has 1 loss on the year. They've kind of fallen out of the whole playoff conversation.
They have, and Mason Rudolph's taken a step back in terms of the Heisman hype. He only had 216 passing yards, which is kind of incredible with 50 points that they put up on the board. But the story of this game was Will Greer, 4 interceptions. I mean, the total turnovers was 9 for the entire game. West Virginia had 5 of them. So Oklahoma State, this is back-to-back weeks they've actually played pretty solid defense, going back to the Texas game too.
And it was a really sloppy game, like you mentioned, with the 9 turnovers. I mean, even though both teams had 350-some yards, Oklahoma State having 462, West Virginia didn't have 350, they had 347. Close enough. So offensively, yeah, but defensively, it was a very sloppy game.
They were 2 for 15 on third downs, West Virginia. And they still put up 39 points, which is kind of incredible.
And they still got 19 first downs.
You also have to consider that I'm pretty sure the weather there was about as ugly as the Clemson, Georgia Tech weather in West Virginia for that game. So you can expect more turnovers to happen, especially when you play in those Big 12 games where it's just light them up, air raid.
Which is probably why Oklahoma State had 246 rushing yards, which they usually don't do. I mean, Mason Rudolph probably shied away from throwing the ball a little
bit.
Understandably so.
Yeah.
Next game we're going to look at is Northwestern and Michigan State. Wildcats. Surprising win here over the Spartans. They won 39-31. Your thoughts?
Triple overtime. You would have thought if Michigan State could finally score 31 points, great chance to win.
Yeah.
They end up losing the game, let up 39 points. This is the first time all year
scored 14 in overtime.
This is the first time all year you've really seen Michigan State struggle on defense, which they pride themselves on. But it really came down to, this is an incredible stat that I saw, Northwestern only 1 penalty the entire game.
Wow.
So for Pat Fitzgerald, that is huge. Good. And Brian Lewerke, their quarterback, had a masterful game. 445 yards, 4 touchdowns, carved up Michigan State. And I'm telling you, this is huge for Northwestern because their schedule looks so favorable. They could be a 9-10 win team again, and no one's talking about them.
Mm-hmm. Michigan State just seems to be one of those teams in the Big Ten nowadays where they're like a chaos agent. They win.
They're in Iowa.
What?
They're like in Iowa.
Yeah,
they're not that great, but they can cause trouble.
They upset 1 or 2 teams every year, usually 1, and then they lose like a game or 2 that they really should have no business losing, and it just causes for just insanity in their conference, and you see that in this game. They've already played pretty well against a lot of these teams, but when you lose to Northwestern when you really shouldn't, it makes the Big Ten a mess.
And what happened to L.J. Scott, their running back? I haven't heard of him all year. I mean, I know he was hurt for the first 3 games, but he's the one guy that could turn to on offense because they're usually not that good of an offensive team. He's been non-existent the entire year, so I don't know if he's injured or whatnot, but that'll really help Michigan State if he gets back to form.
Speaking of non-existent, that translates really well into the next game we're going to talk about, Florida and Georgia. Those Gators were non-existent on Saturday, and they got whooped by the Bulldogs 42-7, the preemptive game that resulted in McElwain's firing, stepping down. We're not really sure.
It tipped the scale.
He's no longer coaching there, but Georgia continues to roll. Florida just fell flat.
The amazing part is Jake Fromm threw 7 passes the entire game. They were 4 for 7.
Yeah,
basically, it was the Mitch Trubisky game against the Panthers when the Bears only threw 7 passes. Georgia was still able to put up 42 points.
You know, I'm surprised Florida scored at all.
It was garbage time.
Honestly, even in garbage time, I'm just surprised they scored. They looked like they were a Pee Wee team playing against a high school team, you know, and it was just bad, just awful.
And Georgia's just who they are. I mean, they know they have a game plan and they stick to it. They control field possession really well, which is what they did this game. And, they just keep mowing along like Bama's going. I mean, Georgia, we saw #1 team in the country right now in the rankings.
You mentioned earlier Notre Dame being hot. I think Georgia's just as hot.
Yeah, they are.
Another game, second to last game that we're going to look at really quick, Penn State, Ohio State. I know our very own Jim Harbaugh predicted the final score of that one, or predicted the Buckeyes were going to come out on top. I personally thought Penn State had it. They did for much of this game, but thanks to a heroic fourth quarter by the Buckeyes, scoring 19 points, they were able to pull out on top. This was a huge win for Ohio State in the horseshoe.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, revenge at its finest. JT Barrett, we finally saw him be the quarterback everyone thought he could possibly be. 33 for 39, 328 yards, 4 touchdowns. I'm going to go on a limb and say that Saquon Barkley's performance here took him out of the Heisman Trophy contention altogether.
One game.
Leonard Fournette had that same
It's a big game, though.
Wow.
Big game, 21 rushes for 44 yards, and 36 of those came on one play. So he went 20 rushes for 5 yards. Leonard Fournette had that same one against Bama, and he was out of
I was about to say, that
so.
reminds me of the Leonard Fournette comparison. That's a good point.
He did
brought up.
have
is
a
a good
kickoff
point, yeah.
return to start the game, though. You have to consider that. That's a big play
Big
that
play.
helped Penn State momentum-wise the whole game because they stayed ahead for a majority of it.
They did take an early lead, but I mean, Penn State has no one to blame but themselves here.
Yeah.
I mean, they had 21-3. They had differing leads of 21-3, 28-10, 35-20. Blew them all. Lost this game.
And it took
Trace McSorley led the team in rushing. That should never happen. Barkley had only 44 yards. That should never happen.
Yeah.
If they continue to play like that, then they're going to see themselves out of the Big Ten race very quickly.
Problem for Penn State is they don't have a lot of games left on their schedule outside of Michigan State that can really impress the committee. If they're already back the way they are right now, Ohio State last year had the Michigan game at the end of the year. They had a lot of chances to impress the committee. Penn State doesn't really have that luxury.
And now Penn State's in the same position that they put Ohio State in last season, where they don't control their own destiny.
Yeah.
Ohio State now, all they got to do is just take care of business, and they're in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State doesn't just need to take care of their business.
Yep.
They're going to need someone to help them out.
All you Penn State fans saying you had to win your conference championship, where are you now? Where are you now? Because you're not tooting the same horn this time around.
Yeah.
It could easily
You're
happen
happy
this year,
Ohio
though.
State won.
I'm
Happy. He's very happy.
Yeah.
Last game we'll touch on really quickly, Clemson, Georgia Tech. This one, it was cold, it was wet, it was rainy. They were able to bounce back, though, played pretty well at home, held Tech to only 10 points. Consistently, year in, year out, we seem to do very well against the triple option. I feel like this was a good bounce-back game for Clemson.
Especially for Kelly Bryant. It was good to see him healthy, effective. Clemson looked balanced. 221 rushing yards, 207 passing yards. It's what they like to do, and they neutralize the option, which is what Brett Venables has been great in the last few years.
Yeah, that defense came out strong and just basically stuffed them. They couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
they had a garbage time TD. Besides that, the defense looked very good.
I mean, they just shut them down completely.
I'm still iffy about our offense. I think I was expecting more points on the board for us, like more than 24. And we still, I think, have issues putting drives together and moving the ball down the field at times. But
I want to see us bounce back with a complete game because you're right. We did kind of shut down in the second half. We only scored
And I think a
3
little bit
points.
of that might have been due to us just kind of stepping off of the gas a little bit.
As only Clemson can.
Yeah.
The
Well, I
Panthers
mean,
too.
and that's a problem that we have. We don't step on the throat enough.
you know,
Maybe they were trying to be a little conservative, keep Kelly Bryant, not as pressured to do a lot of things and risk that ankle.
Yeah.
But
Especially on a
Could've came
slick
out with a win.
surface.
Well, you could call it as Evan McDowell would like to say, a slobber knocker.
I know he loves that term.
Oh, he loves
man.
that term.
And he's in the studio.
He is.
Speaking of the devil.
And now we've gone over week nine's big games. We're going to transition. The inaugural college football playoff rankings for this year came out about an hour and a half ago. What are your thoughts on the rank? We'll get into our teams and where we have teams ranked in a minute. But what were your thoughts on the committee's rankings?
I thought the committee did a pretty fair job. They really valued big wins. They valued teams that have really shown up lately. They kept the perennial powers up there. They kept Alabama and Georgia, Notre Dame, and Clemson up towards the top, which are big name schools. I was a little bit iffy on the last part of it. I didn't think Miami deserved to be in the top 10 quite yet. But it was good to see the teams that had beaten the other teams, like TCU, get the benefit of the doubt to be above Oklahoma State, Ohio State to be above, or Oklahoma to be above Ohio State. I did like how the committee went right there.
yeah, they definitely valued the head-to-head and strength of schedule a lot on their first rankings. But as we get through more and more of the season and a lot of these teams finish their schedules, then I think they're going to have to start throwing some of these head-to-head rankings out and just go based off of eye test and who they think are better teams. So I think it was pretty consistent with what they preach with head-to-head and strength of schedule. But I have a feeling that they're going to have to start straying from that at some point once it starts getting messy.
Two things jumped out at me. One, they didn't have Alabama at 1, so that reassures me that they don't look at the AP poll as some sort of guideline. I like that they took that approach. The second thing that jumped out at me is the fact that they had Oklahoma above Ohio State. You just touched on it a minute ago. It should have happened, although, is it happening right now in the AP poll?
Okay, the AP poll, we can toss
But
that
the
completely out. It doesn't matter.
the AP poll is irrelevant.
Right, but that goes back to my point with the AP poll kind of being the standard for so long, and even in my mind, kind of having a lot to do with what the BCS looked like. It's refreshing to see a poll where they don't look at the coaches poll, they don't look at the AP poll, they rank the teams based solely on like strength of schedule, head-to-head matchups, out-of-conference opponents, and the fact that they had Oklahoma above Ohio State and they had Georgia above Alabama reassures me.
I think the fact that they have Georgia and Alabama so high really sends a message to the rest of the country that if these teams keep winning out and they have a close game in the SEC championship game, you're not going to have one of those teams really fall out of that top 4 towards the end of the year. They're probably going to stay towards the top. So if you're a team that's winning a conference championship, you better impress the committee to jump into those 2 spots remaining.
Because that's the whole thing with the rankings is it's supposed to be the top 4 teams regardless. And we saw that last season. They thought that Ohio State was one of the top 4 teams even without that conference championship. They made the concession there because that's what
how
they
wrong
thought.
they were.
Right, and they make mistakes. That's the thing. They're human.
Yeah.
And I think they got this pretty well right. I mean, I can't really look at this and go,
the first
there's
week's
a blatant thing.
rankings.
But touching on that, like you said, the whole thing with this is if the playoffs started today, who were the top 4 teams that should be in? And I would say they have it right.
But there's a lot of football left to play.
Exactly. So there's a lot that can happen.
A lot of good games that need to happen.
And like you said, they're going to have to make concessions at some point. We saw them make a concession on a conference championship with Ohio State last season. What are they going to concede on this year?
You know what's amazing that nobody's really talking about on it, that I haven't seen been talked about yet, is we've gone back and forth for the last few weeks on the show. What conference is going to get left out? Is it going to be the Pac-12? Is it going to be the Big 12? Who's going to get left out? Well, if you look at the top 4 right now, who a lot of people think is the right top 4, guess how many Power 5 conferences there are in the top 4?
2.
The SEC and the ACC, because you've got Notre Dame as an independent. You have no Big 12, you have no Big 10, you have no Pac-12.
You have no Pac-12 in the entire top 10.
And to be honest, well, they didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
They had no Pac-12 team in the top 10 for the AP poll last week.
Washington
But my point
is the highest Pac-12.
They've
and they're
left
12th.
out 3 Power 5 conferences, and nobody really seems to be raising a ruckus.
No, but I think everyone agrees these are the top 4 teams in the country as of right now. I mean, it makes sense. Notre Dame is obviously going to crash.
But then that raises the question, what is the value of a conference championship? Because looking at this, if you've got Georgia and Alabama at 1 and 2, do you know what that tells me? That tells me when those 2 teams play each other in Atlanta for an SEC championship, more than likely, Georgia's ranked above Alabama right now, more than likely the loser of that game is still going to have an edge over an Oklahoma or an Ohio State or TCU.
Well,
because it goes back to finding the best team.
But that, again, like we've talked about, is the Big 12 championship going to mean that much? Clearly it doesn't.
But you have to consider that if these teams are really as close as we think they are, if the difference between Alabama and Oklahoma are not that severe, if Alabama gets beat pretty bad in the SEC championship game and Oklahoma wins a convincing Big 12 championship and gets that extra win,
so now the
top
championships
10 team,
mean a lot?
They do mean something though. If
Yeah,
it comes
they mean
down to
something.
2 teams trying to edge each other out, that last 13th data point, as you like to call it, is a big time win, a top 10 win that you can use on your resume.
Ohio State didn't need that data point last year, and they still got in. So again,
I don't think the teams were as
I understand, but I'm looking at it here, and to be honest, with the way the committee structured it at the end of last season, and now they're structuring it here with having SEC 1 and 2, to me, it seems like they're saying conference championships,
Well, you haven't played those games yet. They have not taken that into account yet.
The
They're
teams
just
that are-
ranking the top.
But last
The 2
year
teams
it
that
was
are
just
up top
for
are
right now.
undefeated. You have to think about that for a second.
And they're
I mean,
convincing undefeated too.
exactly. So there's a reason they're ahead of some of these other teams that have a loss. I mean,
because we can't take the conference championships into account yet because season's not over. We
If
haven't
they
made
had
it that far.
played
just
each other,
looking at last year, though, Ohio State didn't play in a conference championship last year, and they still got in. That's
Well,
my
I think we
point.
all
remember
agree that
Penn
that was a
State got
wrong decision.
destroyed early on to Michigan. There was a lot of factors that played into it.
I'm just saying it's interesting to see what they are valuing more than other things. They seem to value head-to-head and the strength of schedule significantly more than a conference
Well,
championship.
the conference championship one
the
hasn't
conference
happened yet.
championship hasn't
2.
happened, so they can't value it yet.
Those-
last
the 2 points you
season,
wanted to go.
last season, Ohio State got in without a conference championship.
Yeah, but we're talking about this season.
And
It
this
hasn't happened
season-
yet.
Right.
This season, they probably know, look, we got that wrong. This season, they might not make the same mistake. They might look back on what happened last season and go, you know what? At the time, it seemed like a good idea, but after the way things played out, we don't think that we made the right call. So this year, we're going to do it differently.
Well,
Because these are humans. These are 12 humans in a room putting together what they think the ranking should be and deciding who they think the best 4 teams in the country are.
And that's the goal of the playoff system, is
Right.
the 4 best teams. You can look at strength of schedule, all the schedules, the common opponents, all that. It's the eye test. And that's partly why Alabama is number 2 overall.
And with the
in
conference
first place.
championship, you're going to get one last opportunity to make a statement. In the
Yes.
You
SEC
do.
championship, if it's a close, good game, and whoever wins only wins by 1 or maybe 2 scores, there's a good chance they both get in.
Yeah.
But if it's a blowout and Oklahoma or whoever else is in that championship game wins in a blowout,
Remember, Ohio
There's
State
somebody that
a couple
could get
years
left
ago
out.
won 59-0 in the Big 10 championship game, worked their way into the playoff, and won the national championship. So it's possible. It's going to take some severe cases.
and they
I
got in
still think
over
that
2
right now,
Big 12 teams who had strong cases.
I think you're looking at SEC getting 2 teams in. This is
Oh,
this with the way that they have structured this is the inaugural rankings. The fact that they have put Georgia above Alabama and they're valuing the head-to-head makes me think that honestly, anymore a conference championship does not make or break your season.
Well, I
unless
also
it is
believe-
a
I think they're putting them that
significant
high,
win.
realizing that there's going to be a loss in one of those teams' columns by the end of the year, and that's where they're going to start putting them down. But as of right now, those are the 2 best teams, and they'll
Yeah.
wait for everything else to play
and that's
You
out.
fair,
can't,
but
you
if-
can't account for the eventual meeting, even though it's likely going to happen. It couldn't. There's a chance it couldn't.
Alabama and Georgia still have to play Auburn. Let's not forget that Auburn they're 14th at the country
If
right now.
Alabama loses to LSU and Auburn, they're not making the championship game.
And Alabama solely is going off of the eye test right now. We have not seen them play a tough opponent yet. So all of this could mean nothing a couple weeks from now.
Yes, but they're number 2. Miami's going off the eye test right now because they haven't played anybody and they put them at 10.
The eye test, though, is how you played against those teams. And Miami has not looked impressive at all.
Right.
I'm surprised they're even in the top 10
Auburn,
to begin with.
Alabama has
wow.
looked much more impressive than Miami against the crappy teams.
All right, well, we need to go ahead and jump into our top 10. I think we
Yes.
have a graphic for this. If we could go ahead and get that pulled up. The way we're going to structure it is we're going to go start at the bottom, work our way up. So, Bradley, we'll start with you. Who do you have at number 10?
I got the Wisconsin Badgers solely right now because they're undefeated. They're getting the job done. Jonathan Taylor, I know you're going to touch on later the Illinois game. They didn't look as strong this past week. Jonathan Taylor, the running back, was hurt. Overall, they look like a solid team. They're undefeated. They're getting the job done. They've got chances later on to prove themselves. Right now, I think the fact they're undefeated, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Put them at 10.
Don't you also have them winning the Big Ten?
I think they're going to eventually beat Ohio State, but that's looking forward. We're not looking forward. This is
Okay.
right now.
All right. I guess I'll take that. Yeah.
Jack, who do you have? I think you were next.
I had TCU on mine. I think TCU. Well, the loss this weekend was bad, but it was against an Iowa State team that has proven that they can make other teams' lives difficult in their games. They've played a few good games against other Big 12 teams well. So I have them at 10 right now. But I don't see TCU going any higher than 10 at this point. I think they have Texas and Oklahoma these next few weeks, and I don't see them winning either of those games. I think this is kind of the downhill spiral for them. Texas has played I forget which 2 teams they played, but they played them very close. I think it was Oklahoma.
They played USC very tight.
Yeah, they played USC very tight too.
Mm-hmm.
So like the games where they played big teams, I think they've been close games, and Texas has almost won it. So I think that they're a good team, and I think they'll shock TCU this weekend, and then TCU will start kind of falling off at that point.
For me, at 10, I had Iowa State. They have 3 wins against Power 5 opponents who have a winning record right now, which is higher than a few other teams that I have in my top 10. They are averaging 32 points a game, which is 40th in the country, so not too impressive, and they're also giving up 18.8 a game, which is 22nd in the country. But looking at their schedule, they've got 2 losses, a close one to Iowa, and then one that really doesn't look very good with Texas losing 17-7. But they have a huge win on the road against Oklahoma, and now they have a win against TCU. At the time of those games, I believe both of those teams were in the top 5.
Yeah.
They were.
That's impressive. To have 2 top 5 wins, one of them being on the road, only a little over halfway through the season, I think makes Iowa State deserving of a top 10 spot. Not saying they're contending for a playoff spot. I just think they're worthy of the top
They
10.
remind me of USC a couple years, was it last year, where USC struggled to begin the year and then bounced back.
They
towards
had
the end
3
of the year.
losses
Beat
to
some
begin the
great
year,
teams.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wyatt, who do you got at 10?
I agreed with Jack. I got TCU at 10. Basically what he said, they're a good team. They've played very well. Like I touched on earlier, they have a very solid defense. I think the most they've allowed in a game this season is 36 against SMU. And in that game, they scored 56. So they've won convincingly in a lot of games. Their one loss is Iowa State. And with the way Iowa State's played, that's proven to actually not be a bad loss. Mm-hmm. So I think they're a good, solid back-end team, top 10, get them in there, they squeak in. But like Jack, I think they're going to take at least one more L somewhere, whether that be Texas or Oklahoma. I think they're going to get at least one more. So I don't see them staying in there long, but with the way things stand right now, I think they're a good, solid team to round out the top 10.
All right, we'll go ahead and look at who we've got at number 9, and we will start off with Bradley once we can get that graphic pulled up. Bradley, you go ahead and start us off.
Mike Gundy's crew, I got Oklahoma State, 31st ranked overall strength of schedule. I love the way that they're not only playing offense but playing defense. You know, they've got some very good wins the last few weeks. They got a win against West Virginia very convincingly. They're playing, like I said, a lot more defense. They're turning the ball over a lot more for the other team. Strength of schedule looks great. I think if you match them up with Wisconsin, I think they would outscore them. And a team like Miami, I just don't see quite yet. I think Oklahoma State would take Miami, but I have TCU out of them only because of the head-to-head matchup. So Oklahoma State at 9.
Jack, what about you?
I have Miami at 9. I'm not a firm believer in Miami. I respect that they're undefeated right now, but their toughest game has been Georgia Tech, who almost beat them. So I don't see, like, Miami plays Virginia Tech and Notre Dame these next few weeks. I don't see them winning either of those games. So while they're at 9 right now, I think they're another team like TCU that's only going to be going downhill from this ranking. I just don't like their they had a cupcake schedule up until this point, and the back end starts getting heavy with good teams, and that's where I think they're going to hit a wall.
If Florida State had been a big game for them at the time, it would have really bolstered their strength of schedule. Yeah. But
Florida
the fact
State's
that they faltered has made it. Yeah, they're 2-5, and they're not looking too good right now. For me at 9, I had Wisconsin. I have not been impressed with the Badgers at all this year. They have one win against Power 5 opponents with a winning record. Their non-conference opponents are combined for an 11-15. So 11-15, not good at all. Looking at their schedule, they've beaten some teams well. They beat BYU on the road 40-6. I don't even think BYU is going to make a bowl game this year.
They beat Utah State.
They beat Utah State. They've beaten FAU. They've beaten Nebraska, Northwestern, Purdue, Maryland, Illinois.
The Illinois like the bottom tier of the Big Ten.
The Illinois game I watched on Saturday, and honestly, it gave me a headache.
Now, Jonathan Taylor was hurt. Remember that. Their running back was hurt, which is kind of how Stanford had with Bryce Love. He was also hurt.
It gave me a headache. It was bad.
But it was Visor. They can only play the teams that are on their schedule, and they've won all of them.
If you're one-dimensional and you have to rely on your running back, though, you're not going to make it very far.
Their quarterback is so
he's efficient.
Bad.
They're one of the most efficient teams in the entire country.
Bad is the word. Bad. He is bad. That's why I have the Badgers at 9. They shouldn't even be in the top 10.
So you rank them, though?
They shouldn't. Wyatt, who you got?
Okay.
At number 9, I've got the Oklahoma Sooners.
Wow.
Disrespectful.
Wow. Holy cow.
How is it disrespectful?
All right, enlighten us, sir. Enlighten us.
That's why I've got them ahead of TCU. That's why I've got them ahead of TCU, because that Ohio State win is very important. That's a very good win. But this team has struggled against teams that they shouldn't have struggled against. They struggled against Baylor. They only beat them by 1 touchdown, or 1 score, rather. That should never happen. Baylor's garbage. And that's putting it politely. That's as polite as I can put it on this show.
Baylor fights. They're 0-8.
Yeah,
but they still
they
always
fight
show
sexual
up.
assault allegations.
No, they always show up to games,
Basketball
and even when they're getting beat, they still continue to play.
I'm just saying this is a team that should not have to struggle against Baylor. They should not. I mean, Texas, it's the rivalry, but still, they struggled against a Texas team that's down that they really shouldn't. I don't think they should have struggled as much as they should have against Texas. They struggled against Kansas State. They lost to Iowa State again. That's looking to be a good loss at this point. I just think that, again, Bedlam is going to be tough for them. TCU is going to be tough for them. They're catching an L again in this season. So just like TCU, I've got them at the bottom because I'm not that impressed with them and the way they've played. Yeah, they've got some good things going, but it's going to be short-lived.
Let me ask you something. If they would have beaten Iowa State, where would you have them? Because Iowa State's a good loss. That's
if they were undefeated, I would probably have them maybe around top 5.
So you think that 1 touchdown difference is the difference between 9 and 5?
That's tough to say.
That's a low blow.
I'm not sold.
We'll jump into it later, but the fact that you have Oklahoma below Ohio State, I can't see how you can.
Yeah,
you could argue the same thing with Georgia, though. It was a 1-point game with Notre Dame. If they had that loss to Notre Dame, they would have dropped heavily in these rankings, I think, because their strength of schedule.
They won, though. The game, at the end of the day, it's just like Miami playing Georgia Tech.
And
they beat them by a point.
Destroying other opponents. I mean,
yes,
it's not like game.
But the Notre Dame game was the quality win that they needed to put them at the 1.
They also destroyed Mississippi State 31-3, who's ranked 16th in the rankings.
Mississippi
State.
They're ranked 16th in the country right now.
Well,
so
we're going to move on. We're going to look at number 8, who we've got now on the number 8 spot. So, Bradley, we'll start off again with you.
I've got TCU. I don't see how you could put them below Oklahoma State right now. They have that one great win against Oklahoma State. Now, they did, like I said, they struggled against Iowa State, who is a good team. I think they outplayed Iowa State. They outgained them, and they should have scored a couple times. They had a couple fluke turnovers. But I think if you took away that one touchdown difference, they'd be top 4 right now. So I'm going to get into that a little bit with Penn State later. But the fact they had that one screw up right there, they have looked sluggish at times, but they've been a good team all year. They have a great strength of schedule. That one touchdown, you'd give them the benefit of the doubt. They'd be top 4 if it wasn't for that one.
But we can't give them the benefit of the doubt.
We can't, but I still think they're a good team. They outplayed Iowa State when they had to, and I think they would have been top 4 if they did, but they did take the L.
Lots of teams outplay other teams, like NC State outplayed South Carolina at the start of the season and somehow lost that game.
That's college football.
They lost that game because they had a terrible defensive performance.
Jack, who do you have at 8?
Wisconsin at 8. I think they're just a little bit better than Miami, but I think both those teams, while they're undefeated, I just don't respect the undefeated mark. Like, the strength of schedule is just, it's laughable. I think I said they played Utah State as one of their games this year. I'm waiting. We're going to have to wait until they play Iowa, I think, which is like the week before Michigan. So Wisconsin has a few games at the end of the year where they're going to face a tougher test, and that's when we'll get to see where Wisconsin really lies on the rankings. But up until that point, I'm not really bought on Wisconsin.
At 8, I have the Canes, Miami. They only have one win right now against Power 5 opponents who have a winning record. The ACC opponents that Miami have beaten so far have a combined record of 15-25. Some of those games have been complete nail-biters, games that have been way too close. Looking at their schedule, they really did. They had such a weird start because I think they started out with who was BCU?
Bethune-Cookman.
Okay, they played them. Then they had Arkansas State canceled. Florida State was postponed with all the hurricanes issues going on there. They played Toledo, and then finally they played Duke on the road, which I guess would have been middle of September.
Duke's 4-5, so it's still not
right. But I'm saying it was their first real game.
At that point,
they were a month behind everybody else, so it took them a while to get into the year. Now, granted, they've won all their games. They're 7-0. They're first in their division. But games like Georgia Tech winning by a point, Syracuse they only won by 8, UNC they only won by 5. They've just been too close for me to really feel like that they have what it takes to contend for an ACC championship or to contend for a playoff.
I got to ask you a question though. Out of all what you just said right there, they've cutting it way too close. They're barely squeaking by. TCU beat Oklahoma State, which is a top 15 win. Miami has none of that. If you would have given Miami TCU's schedule and TCU Miami's schedule, how would that play out then?
Well, now that's speculation.
Well, let's just look at it though. If TCU with a win against Oklahoma State, a top 15 win, Miami has nothing close to that. They're barely squeaking by. What out of that schedule can you tell me that Miami is a better team right now than TCU? The fact there's a 0 in the loss column?
Yes. That's the only
TCU,
thing.
The only loss they've had is to a top 15 team in Iowa State.
It doesn't matter though. They've won all their games.
So you're strictly going off of record. You're not going to.
Yeah, that's why people have Alabama in the top 4.
Well, Alabama's won the eye test. We'll get into that later. How can you say that TCU is a better team right now than Miami? Miami's strength of schedule is laughable. TCU has beaten Oklahoma State.
They've won all their games.
That's it. It doesn't even matter.
If you win all your games and you go 12-0 at the end of the year, realistically, you're going to have a much better chance at getting a playoff berth than if you. It's great.
You're speculating ahead.
Great. No, I'm not. Well, that's exactly what you're doing. Because you're speculating by substituting a team for another team's season and saying, "What if? What if? What if?" That's called speculation.
Well, that's how you match up each team.
No, that's speculation. You have to look at who they've played. You have to look at common opponents. The point is the Hurricanes. Exactly. They're 7-0.
You think Miami's a better team than TCU right now?
They're 7-0.
Do you think Miami's a better team than TCU?
7-0, Mr. Street.
You don't?
Who do you have
I
at
don't
8?
see how you can put that.
The Canes are 7-0. They're
Doesn't
7.
matter. You have Wisconsin really
They're
well.
7-0.
If
If you've won all your games, at the end of the day, it matters. It matters. It's great to have a tough out-of-conference opponents. It's great to have that tough scheduling. But if you get it done, regardless of how it looks, if you get it done, you're going to have
way to punish TCU for actually challenging themselves and not playing.
Well, it's about time the
Toledo
Big 12
and
did.
2-5 Florida State.
You could say
No. You can't pull the whole Florida State isn't a big game because every other year it is a big
It's a
game. So
rivalry game.
Miami doesn't know that going
They are
into the year.
2-5, lost to Boston College.
Don't buy
and
that
Miami,
at all.
Miami scored on the last play of the game.
Don't buy it at all.
Rivalry
If
games
Miami
are important.
beats Virginia Tech this weekend, will you shut up about that?
No.
See, if they beat
But we
Virginia
can't
Tech,
look ahead, like you said.
No, well, you're speculating by pretending they're playing another team's schedule. If Miami,
Well, that's how you weigh out each
If
team.
Miami beats Virginia Tech and/or contends against Notre Dame, you have to give them respect.
2 weeks from now, talk.
You're saying if, like they're playing
TCU
TCU's
is a
schedule.
better team than Miami.
That's ridiculous.
all right, you're done. Why?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can I get my piece in now?
Yeah.
Okay, I also have Miami at 8. I mean, undefeated has to count for something at some point.
Doesn't matter,
I
guys.
really do.
Doesn't matter.
All of these things are important.
Stubborn. He's like an old man.
All of these things are important.
Sorry
Yes.
that TCU and Oklahoma played Iowa State and lost. Iowa State's a good team.
At some
Oklahoma
point,
beat Ohio State. And you have Miami.
Order. Let the man finish.
At some point, undefeated has to count for something. And also, one thing that you have to take into consideration is conference prestige. And that's what I'm taking
But who have
into
they played?
account.
Who's Miami's best one?
Probably, I would say, in my opinion, either
Georgia Tech,
I would say Georgia
maybe
Tech.
Georgia Tech or Florida
who lost
State.
to Tennessee.
They
That
also
was-
okay,
they
that was
also beat
beginning of the year as a
Syracuse.
different team.
Okay, but NC
Who beat
State
us?
lost to South Carolina. So what does it say about NC
South Carolina's
State?
6-2. Tennessee's 0-5 in the SEC.
Yeah, I've been high on Carolina all year.
I'm not.
You've been
saying
calling me
I'm high.
crazy for
It's
thinking
not
they're
a
going to be
terrible
good.
loss.
Oh, that's not what I've been hearing.
Oh man.
I cannot see how you guys give just because you guys are lost to the fact they have a 0 in the loss column.
So here's the thing, Bradley. Clemson barely scraped by, 2 years ago when we went undefeated? We barely scraped by in ACC play. Like, yeah, we had maybe one more big game than Miami does.
Yeah, but our
right
best
now.
win was not Georgia Tech.
Yeah, but we were just scraping by. So while we didn't really pass the eye test, people
The first half of last
gave
year
us a higher rank
was
because we were
rough.
undefeated and we were in the ACC.
Yeah, but we had good wins though. We've beaten better teams than just Georgia Tech.
We
You're
didn't-
gonna have Oklahoma way up there because they beat Ohio State. They had a great win.
Absolutely.
So how can you put? I'm just not seeing how you guys are winning.
I'm not
this
We didn't
confident
play
in-
Florida State until the end of the year on
Yeah.
the undefeated season. We were ranked in the top 4 for, I think,
Yeah.
a majority of the
Well, if you
season.
compare to the rest of the teams, we had a better resume at that point than the other teams did because that's how the college football
We were
playoff
playing a lot of the same
ranks
teams.
teams. Then who?
Georgia State, Georgia Tech, NC State wasn't very good at the time. I don't know who else we
That would have
played.
been embarrassing to
Syracuse.
lose. What do you mean don't look at
I'm
last
looking at
year?
This
You have-
year alone, TCU has beaten better teams than Miami. Yes, they lost.
And they've lost a game.
One game to a top 15 team. You're going to punish
It
them.
sucks
for
to
that.
suck, but yeah.
Miami nearly lost to 1-8 UNC.
Nearly.
So we're just talking about little points here.
Hey, you take
I'm
you
trying
were
to
just
find
talking
the
you were
best
just
team.
talking about taking away points and then they're undefeated.
I'm trying to look at the best
This is
team
this is also the bottom of the top 10, which really technically doesn't really
Doesn't matter.
But
Yeah.
I'm looking.
Because none of
if
these teams
you're
are in
going
the
to rank a
playoff
team
at this
above
point.
the other team, you are telling me that they are a better team right now. Than
I'm
the other
telling you
The
that you have been
record-
voted off the island. The tribe has spoken.
team. Who do you have?
We're gonna move on. We have to go down to number 7. I can't
I
believe
feel
that
like
took
Harbaugh.
10 minutes. We're gonna move on to number 7 now. Thank goodness we
All right.
all have the
Oh,
same
wow.
team.
We all have Penn
Similar.
State, so can we skip
Can we
it?
move to
goodness.
number 6?
Okay, no, we're gonna touch on 7 briefly.
What?
Penn State, they lost to Ohio State this past weekend, but we've agreed and we've talked about it on the show all season. They're a great team. They have possibly the Heisman winner with Saquon Barkley. Is there any particular reason that you had them at 7, or do we just all want to sing Kumbaya?
I have them at 7 because they've lost, so they should be a little lower than everyone else at the top. But I have them ranked above the teams I have them ranked above because overall, they've looked pretty darn good.
Yeah.
5, 6, and 7 makes sense. Oklahoma beat Ohio State. Ohio State beat Penn State. If all the schedules are going to be pretty similar, you take that head-to-head and you factor it in.
For me, they have 3 wins right now against Power 5 opponents who have a winning record, which is more than Miami and more than Wisconsin's tied for Iowa State. They've played well all year. They had the 1-point loss to Ohio State. I don't really think there's anything else that you can really say about Penn State besides if they'd have beaten Ohio State, then they'd still be up there in the playoff discussion. But they lost. It is what it is.
If they beat
but I
Ohio
still
State,
think
they'd
they're
probably
a
be top 4,
top caliber team. Top caliber team.
Yeah, I do think they're a top caliber team, but that loss really hurts them. I don't see them making it into the playoff unless they get a lot of help outside of their
Ohio
schedule.
State did it last year without a conference championship, which that was the point that I was referring to
But remember,
earlier.
they had that win against Oklahoma.
They did,
It was a
but
signature win.
that's my
I think
point.
that the committee has realized their mistake. I don't see them doing that again.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fair.
Well, they have a
Then
reason
it's
to now.
mistake.
So
I think Penn State's going to be on the bad side of those decisions for 2 years in a row, which stinks
may
for
be
them.
right.
Which is going to
but-
suck for them.
Yeah.
But they were the beneficiary of an unfortunate, ill-advised scenario. And now that the committee is going to reverse their wrongdoings
Yeah.
and actually get it right.
it's not a wrongdoing, but you can continue.
Well,
Yeah.
we're going to move on. We're going to look at number 6. What do we have at number 6? Oh, another streak of
thank
similar
goodness.
teams. So we've got all Ohio State. Now, that's interesting that nobody has them in the top 5. Does anyone care to elaborate on why?
Well,
Because the teams I have above them I think are better.
true.
Okay,
find out.
that's fair.
I think
That's how you should rank your
I think the win over Penn State this weekend definitely solidifies that all these blowout wins that Ohio State's been having since their loss to Oklahoma were more legit than we were thinking. Up until this point, Ohio State didn't really have anything to point to on their schedule saying, hey, look, we did this.
Nothing.
And I think the win over Penn State this weekend helps a lot. But at the same time, it's just one game. They looked much better in that
And
game
it
than they
took-
have all season.
It took an amazing fourth quarter. I think the point that you just touched on, they have nothing up until this game to point to in their season. It's like, hey, we did this. Their 2 biggest games so far have been Oklahoma and Penn State. They lost to Oklahoma pretty convincingly.
They got
at
blown
home.
out
It was
at home.
embarrassing.
Yeah, at their place.
At the start of the fourth quarter, for this Penn State game, which by the way was also at home for them, they were getting their tails whooped. And it took a great fourth quarter. You got to give them props. They came out on top. But if they'd have lost to Oklahoma and Penn State, 2 top-tier teams in their respective conferences, by a significant margin at home, this would be a totally different conversation.
They wouldn't
Be a
even be.
no-brainer.
They would not be
Totally
top 10.
different.
No, they wouldn't. I don't
But
think
it's
they would.
impressive.
Yeah.
They were able to. They rallied. You could say that it was because of last year and how it ended last year. You can say whatever you want, but they were able to rally. They came out a point on top.
It took an ungodly fourth quarter from JT Barrett
It
too.
did.
I think he had 3 touchdowns, 13 for 13 for like over 200 yards,
He
which is
played
just
well.
ridiculous.
Yes.
But Ohio State, they completely dominated Penn State the entire game. Now, the points may have been a little different. They had the kickoff
I don't
return.
know about that.
And they had that fluke call in the third quarter that should have been an interception.
Penn
I
State
think
was
that
a
should have been a touchdown.
Penn State was killing
It
them
was
the whole
iffy.
game.
Ohio State had double the amount of yards that Penn State did, and they completely shut down.
Yeah,
Saquon.
but you guys
I think they
scored.
outplayed them the entire
I
game.
disagree. I think Penn
and they
State
ended up
took
winning,
it
which
to
I
them.
think they should have won that game.
Well, regardless, this is an impressive win. But none of us have them in our top 5. Speaking of top 5, we'll go ahead and get into that now. We've got 3 with Oklahoma. Wyatt has Wisconsin. Why don't we switch it up?
Please.
Start with Wyatt.
I'd love to hear that.
And why you've got the Badgers in the top 5.
I've liked them all season, honestly.
Why?
Okay.
I feel like they have a good team. I feel like they have a really good team. They have in my opinion, a good defense. They got an excellent rushing game. Now the quarterback situation might be a little behind. It might be a little to be desired. But I think overall they've got a pretty good team. A team that in my personal opinion, is a team that is a legitimate contender to win the Big Ten. A team that is a legitimate contender to make the playoff. And I just personally think that they're really good. And the undefeated
opinion is
record.
your opinion.
The
Yeah.
undefeated record also is important as well.
I think.
They're the LSU of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
the Miami of the Big
Argue
Ten.
that. Yeah.
Precisely. And I just think they're the better team than Miami.
And for the 3 of us, I think that it's probably a combination of the fact that Oklahoma beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
So you kind of you look at the head-to-head there, and it makes sense to put Oklahoma above Ohio State. But also, they've played well in their other games. They haven't blown anybody out significantly. They did lose to Iowa State, which
It's starting to look like a better loss
starting
every
to look
time
like
they
a
play
pretty
a game.
good loss. So you could argue that they've had 2 big games this year. They're 1-1 in those games. I think their season will be defined by this Saturday's game in Bedlam. It's college game day. It's on the road. They get out of there with a win. I think you're on the track to making it to the playoff.
And that
Potentially, yeah.
And listen, the Ohio State loss that we had a couple weeks ago, people freaked out about it. It's not a bad loss anymore. It was, a good loss. Iowa State had a great game plan, took control of that game, but Oklahoma's still a great team. That win against Ohio State like we said a couple years ago, was it last year with Ohio State? They had that win against Oklahoma. That's always what they could look back on. That's what Oklahoma can look on. If they were, to stumble a little bit towards the end of the year, they have that one win against Ohio State. And that's why they're fifth.
I think the one thing that really helps Oklahoma is their strength of schedule out of conference too. Playing Ohio State out of conference is going to end up helping them enormously at the end of this year, especially since they got a W. Because their conference, like we've said, it's not as prestigious as some of the other conferences is. So they had to go out of their conference and play a good team in order to help their strength of schedule and boost their ratings. And they did. They went and played Ohio State and they beat them. And in the grand scheme of things, people are going to look at that and they're going to say they went out of conference. They played a very good team. They beat them on the road, and there's going to be a lot of people that like that.
But let's not forget, the Big 12 has four teams in the top 15 right now.
Yeah,
so
but I think some of them
prestigious, but it is good.
It is good, but
And
I
then
think
you have
a lot of people
Baylor.
bag on it.
We won't talk about Baylor.
Then you've
Baylor
got
and UNC
Baylor.
are on equal playing fields right now.
All right, moving on. Let's go ahead, and I think we're now moving into the top 4. So this is
Playoff
who's in
teams,
for
yeah.
us. We
Oh, well, how
all
about that?
have the Tigers at number 4. I feel like that, and I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I feel like that since Clemson's lost a game, it was a bad loss to Syracuse on the road. But we've had 6, which is the most in the country, 6 wins against Power 5 opponents who have a winning record, and we've played well in all of our away games except Syracuse with the Virginia Tech game, the Louisville game. Besides that one blemish, I feel like Clemson's played a pretty complete season so far.
And I think the committee was right to not to completely excuse that loss, but look at it a different light. Because Kelly Bryant was hurt the entire second half. Syracuse really wore down our defense. I think if the offense was on the field a little longer, the defense would have shown.
I don't even know if they
up a
wore
little
down
bit.
the defense.
couldn't
And they still almost won. It took 2 missed
showed
field
up.
goals by Clemson to even lose that
Yeah,
game.
if we missed 2 or 3 field goals. If we made just one more of those, it's a completely different game. Completely. So, and that's another thing too, looking at it for me. The team has been dominant. There are 3 wins in the month of September against top 15 teams, 2 of which came on the road. That's no easy task. So the strength of schedule is looking pretty good. So that's another thing to consider. And they've looked good, even in the loss. They still didn't look awful. They didn't look good.
They looked exposed without a starting quarterback.
Because it was a sloppy game on both parts.
I think
Both
most
teams
teams would be exposed
played
without a starting quarterback.
a poor game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
your defense
our
has to
game,
step up
our
on
game
it.
was just slightly
When your
more
defense is on the
poor.
field for 99% of the time, then you're
Well,
going to get tired.
that's because the defense never did anything to stop them. I mean, they just no huddle
They were
offense.
exhausted.
I'm not going to
Right.
get into why we lost the Syracuse game, but I think we can all agree that Clemson's body of work, besides the Syracuse game, is the most impressive.
The resume speaks for itself.
And the reason that we're at 4 is because of the Syracuse game.
Yeah, that's true. The only reason we'll get to the rankings, but I have Notre Dame just one above them, and really the only thing that I think Notre Dame has on Clemson is that their one loss is to a better team than Clemson's one loss as of right now. I think both schedules are very strong, but Clemson's strength of schedule is why we're so high right now.
Let's go ahead and get in and look at number 3. So we've got Bradley and Jack and Wyatt with Notre Dame.
Yep.
And I am the first one to put Bama on the board. So Jack's already offered his take on Notre Dame. Any of y'all want to add, or you want me to go into Bama?
Notre Dame and Clemson are extremely close. I think the fact that Clemson has that one loss to Syracuse, Notre Dame, like you said, has that one loss to Georgia, better loss for Notre Dame. But also Notre Dame has better wins. I feel like in my mind, USC, NC State, and Michigan State, 3 top 25 wins. Louisville kind of fell off the face of the earth. So Clemson, while they do have 2 top 15 wins, does not have that win against Louisville to kind of bolster that resume altogether. I think Notre Dame's just been the hotter team as of late, so you got to put them up at number 3.
I don't know if you can argue that the wins for Notre Dame are better because
It's pretty close. It's
They're really
USC
similar,
and
I
Michigan
think.
State are starting to fall off a little bit. Don't get me wrong, when they played them, they were good. But they're starting to fall off a little bit. I'm pretty sure Clemson, 2 of the top 15 wins that they had, Virginia Tech and Auburn, both are still in the top 15.
Yeah.
Top 15.
With the
I don't.
exclusion of Louisville.
Yeah, with the exception of Louisville. But that's not the case for Notre Dame. NC State is still pretty high in the rankings. They definitely took a drop after this week. But USC is starting to
did
really
destroy them. I mean,
Yeah,
let's
they
not
did.
forget that.
Yeah, part of the reason they dropped was because it was such a blowout. But
It's
you
a
have
3-touchdown game.
And they destroyed USC as well. That's why USC dropped so far.
But let's be honest. Who thought USC was really going to contend for a
I
championship?
didn't think they would get beat 49-14 though.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the reason that I had Bama at 3, they have 1 win against a Power 5 opponent that has a winning record. It's Texas A&M. They have not beaten an opponent currently ranked, and for me, looking at Bama, you can say that the eye test is important, and it is, but looking at their schedule, when you're beating teams like Arkansas and Tennessee and Ole Miss and Vanderbilt and Colorado State and Fresno State, I don't care how bad you beat them. It just doesn't impress me. You've got to have a big game. Now, they have a big game this weekend with LSU. They've got another big game the next weekend on the road, Mississippi State. They close the year at Auburn. So they have plenty of opportunities. If they go 2-1 in those games, I'd be amazed. If they went 3-0, I'd be really impressed. So for me, I just feel like Bama's a great team. They've proven it year in, year out. They just haven't shown it yet because they haven't had the opportunity.
They have
That's
a
why I
0
got them at
loss
3.
column, though.
They do. That's why they're at 3.
You don't have them at 2, though? Why do you have Notre Dame higher?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and look at number 2. So all y'all
All right,
have
roll
Bama,
reversal.
and then I've got Notre Dame. So why don't y'all tell me why you've got Bama at 2?
Eye test. They're outscoring SEC opponents 238 to 38.
Did you
They
not?
are
Did none of the
destroying.
opponents that they've played, except for Texas A&M,
They
are
are
winning records?
They're still
destroying
kicking butt, though.
opponents.
They're still kicking butt.
The strength of schedule is not as good. They do have 3, ranked games coming up close. I think the
Yeah.
fact that Notre Dame did take the loss to Georgia, you have to factor the Alabama, the fact that they are undefeated. I'm going to go back to that in a sec. They are undefeated, and they've just been destroying opponents. They passed the eye test. That's why they're number 2 for me.
Yeah, I have them number 2. Just again, the undefeated. They're undefeated. Notre Dame's not. So that's another thing to consider. They have the conference prestige. Notre Dame doesn't.
Yeah.
That's another thing to consider.
I
The
don't know
eye
if the
test is
SEC
another thing to
prestige is
consider.
as big
Yeah,
as
I
it
mean,
used to be.
that's a
It's
little
still
bit
it's still
fabricated.
there. I
Yeah,
think
but
it's still there, but it's
You know, if
It's
you go down to
something to
Columbia,
consider.
the SEC is all they talk about. But in most parts of the
Wow.
country, there's actual other conferences that actually play other games.
Oh, I recognize that.
Yeah.
I prefer the ACC anyway, but But like you said, eye test is another big factor, and they've played very good football.
They have, but here's the thing about Notre Dame, who I have at 2. They've played great football against great teams. They have one loss to Georgia by a point. If they had beaten Georgia, you bet your butt I'd have Notre Dame at 1. They've played UGA. They've gone on the road to Michigan State and won by 20 points. They've throttled USC, who you just highlighted a minute ago, and then they beat NC State in what you just called blowout fashion. So for me, looking at Notre Dame, the only team in the country that has a body of work that is as comparable to that is Clemson. And guess what? Clemson's loss was to Syracuse. Notre Dame's was to Georgia, who I have at number 1. So I get the whole you're destroying the SEC opponents with Bama, but give me games that are actually interesting and teams that are actually have winning records. Michigan State's got a winning record. Georgia's the number 1 team in the country right now. USC, NC State, those are quality wins. Bama's beating up on Ole Miss, Fresno State, and Tennessee.
Interesting,
this
because
is-
about 5 minutes ago, you just mentioned that since TCU and Miami, if we're comparing them, Miami was playing pretty crappy opponents. They're undefeated, though, so they get the benefit of the doubt.
What's TCU
had
got to do
better
with Notre
wins.
Dame?
I'm just saying TCU had a lot more better wins than Miami did, but you have Miami ahead of TCU because they're undefeated.
Sir,
Alabama's undefeated.
we're higher up in the rankings.
I'm
not
just saying
lower.
you cannot change your opinion if you're going to say the 0
There's
loss
nothing
column trumps
changed. You
everything.
just have to look at who they
It's funny.
play.
What
It's
did
funny
you do?
how this works. I remember, I think 2 years ago, it felt like every week Bama was playing a ranked opponent in the SEC,
Yeah.
and now SEC has really fallen off the face of the earth.
They're no longer.
There's such a
They're
gap.
no longer the unequivocal best conference.
Yeah.
Now there's
There's a lot of
the
arguments that
ACC
can be
that's
made.
staking a claim. The Big Ten is staking a
Big
claim.
Ten.
Yeah,
for deepest.
the
There's-
SEC is the talent's been dropping. I think this is the first
Yeah.
year that Bama has had an issue with their strength of schedule, and it's kind of weird to see it where we're making the argument they haven't played a team
Exactly, because they didn't need to schedule tough out of
Yeah.
conference opponents because their conference opponents were tough.
Yeah.
Not so much the case.
And they
anymore.
schedule these games, I think 3 or 4 years in advance.
Yeah.
So it's
True.
not like they're scheduling next season's games right now. I mean, these have
you
already
could
been
still
scheduled.
do a better job of scheduling Power 5 opponents.
Granted, they
as
did-
opposed to non-Power 5.
Alabama did go after Florida State.
Yeah, they tried.
They
And
did.
Florida
They
State
did
really
benefit
blew
from
that.
Florida
That
State
was a
falling
good
off
win
the
at the
face of year.
time. That
It
was
was.
a fantastic win at the time.
August
we just didn't
feels
anticipate
like a
Florida State
long
pooping the
time
bed.
ago.
Yeah.
especially a year ago.
It's not a long thing.
Well, we need to wrap up the show, so really quickly we're going to look at number 1. I think all of us consensus yes had Georgia, the top dogs. I know your brother Ryan
He's
is
happy.
very happy as a freshman.
Yeah.
I mean, has Georgia done anything to this point where they would not be deserving of the number 1 spot?
Beat Notre Dame on the road, destroyed Mississippi State, no bad losses. They're outscoring opponents in the SEC 254 to 73. They're basically doing what Alabama does. They're just doing it better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and with their, like you said, Alabama, what are they known for? Defense and the running game. And what's Georgia doing? Defense and the running game.
You can thank Kirby Smart for that.
Yeah, I mean
Translated that
they're kicking butt. They've got the win over Notre Dame, and I mean, it's tough to argue against Georgia being number one. I mean, I'm sure if I tried hard enough, I could think of a good enough argument.
You can make the argument it's Bama, and they're you never want to bet against them because it's a Nick Saban coach team and they have 5 stars all over the board. But I think what puts Georgia ahead for me is that they have that one win that they can point to and say, this is like what I was talking about with Ohio State. They didn't have anything they could point to until Penn State. Georgia has the Notre Dame game that they can rely on, and I think that puts them ahead of Bama right now. Bama hasn't played anybody yet. I mean, it's just they haven't played anybody. Georgia has at least played Notre Dame, and they'll play Auburn. They'll play
Georgia Tech.
Those are a few good games to solidify their strength of schedule at the end of the year. But other than the Notre Dame game, I think those two teams, if the Notre Dame game wasn't there, it would be tough for me to put Georgia ahead of them. But because they have that Notre Dame game, and Notre Dame is getting so hot at this point in the season, it's making Georgia look so much better every week.
Right. Especially the
last
reverse
2
of Florida
weeks.
State. Florida State's such a great team, fell off the face of the earth. Notre Dame's such a bad team, rose up to prominence.
Well, there's 2 important games left in the season for the SEC. There's Georgia at Auburn, and then there's Bama at Auburn.
I would say 3. You have to take
into
Alabama, LSU.
I understand that, but I think the common opponent here, with it being Auburn, is huge.
You'll get to see.
If Georgia beats Auburn and Bama loses to Auburn, argument over.
They're both on the road, too.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
if LSU beats Alabama, that's also huge, too. And then
That's not
That could throw a wrench in the
Not so
SEC.
fast, my friend.
It's unlikely. I don't see it happening, but there's a chance.
Watch out, Georgia, South Carolina this week. I'm not saying South Carolina's a good team, but it's on the road.
South Carolina
It
is
is at
probably
home.
the
It's
best,
at home.
the
It's
best,
at home.
the best bet of an SEC team in their division beating them. I would say.
And just remember, no team that started the college football rankings number 1 has ever won the national championship. So.
When's the last time
that's a shame.
South Carolina beat Georgia between the hedges?
Oh God, I couldn't tell you.
That's probably been a
I
while.
probably should know since I'm the old ball coach, but
Yeah.
Let's see if Google's got an
I don't know.
answer.
I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this very long edition of
heated.
After Further Review. Got a little heated at times, but we had a lot of fun. Thanks again to Forrest Gump and
Steve
Irwin coming on the show. For Jim Harbaugh, I'm Steve Spurrier, and this has been After Further Review.
Thanks for watching.